Welcome to our webinar on scholarly dissemination. This is the second in our series, offering opportunities for people to come together to hear from experts, raise questions and reflect together. So welcome also to those who are watching this as a recording. We're conducting this in different time zones. So I'm aware our speakers today, we've got some who are joining us very late at night, some who are joining us very early in the morning, and I'm sure some of those in the room are also experiencing that as well. So let's make a start. Hi, everybody. So our focus today, for years, academics have been valued for their contributions to knowledge through peer-reviewed research articles as the most important way for academics to share new and impactful research and practice. However, for many in community university engagement, the dominant conventions of academic publishing, they marginalise or exclude potential authors who want to share their work and the things that they seek to share. So that's collaboration, methodological innovation, a diversity of knowledges and practices, and an emphasis on action. So our seminar today will focus on academic journal conventions and the roles they play or could play in building a more inclusive, diverse and impactful publishing ecosystem. Our international panel here today, who we're very thankful to have here, are bringing their perspectives on challenging academic publishing norms to create opportunities for all those involved in engaged research to share their work and their learning. The webinar is a partnership between Sophie Duncan, co-editor of Research for All, and Margaret Malone, editor, Gateways Journal, who are joined today by our other speakers. So we have Christina Vrouwenvelder, Assistant Director of Publications at AGU. We welcome Liz Weaver, former CEO of Tamarack Institute, and Leslie Chan, Department of Global Development Studies at University of Toronto. So in a moment, we will be asking each of our panelists to share a provocation before exploring with them a range of topics and asking you, the audience, for your questions and reflections also. But first, we're really interested to know something about our attendees and our audience here today. So we're going to invite you to contribute via Mentimeter. So Jack, I'll ask you to pop up the Mentimeter slide if we can. Hopefully most of you can engage in this, but if not, again, please do use the chat to pose any of your thoughts in there. So thank you, Jack. That's coming up. Great. So the way in which you can engage with Menti, you can go at the top of the screen there, you can see menti.com. So you can access that through your internet browser, and there's a code there that you can put in and that will take you to this presentation. Alternatively, if you do have a secondary device, a mobile device, you can scan that QR code there. Great, and I can see people popping in their thumbs up to let us know that you are into that platform. Great. Okay, so what we will do, I think most people are entering that. So Jack, could we possibly move to the next slide on our first question? Jack. So we'll ask you, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the following statements? And you can add this into the Mentimeter platform. So I often share engaged research through academic journals. I have accessed academic journals to inform my engagement work. I have written with colleagues outside my organisation. I would like to see changes in academic publishing. Okay, so this is a live poll. So the more people engage with it, we will see that change. Okay, so we have a lot of agreement and resonance with changes in academic publishing. I think sort of average there in terms of individuals often sharing engaged research through academic journals. People writing collaboratively with colleagues outside their organisation. Brilliant. Thanks, everybody, for engaging with that. We will move on to the next slide, I think, Jack. Let's get a bit of a feel for how people are working within the room. Okay, so this is more of a free text opportunity here. So what role, if any, does academic publishing play in sharing engaged research? And I'll give everyone a minute to reflect on that and add their thoughts. It helps disrupt academic thinking. Fantastic, thank you. I think others are typing away. Oh, brilliant. We have loads coming in. Thanks, everyone. So dissemination of ideas makes engagement as a process visible, attempting to shape research practices in traditional disciplines, collaboration, knowledge translation. Oh, wow. I'm not going to be able to keep up with all of them here. So it plays a crucial role because it broadens our scope and ideas dissemination capacity, values those different knowledges and those different modes of knowledge. Brilliant. There's loads there, and just being aware of time that we have today. Hopefully for the panel, this is quite helpful as well to see so what's coming in from the audience. Fantastic. We'll move on to one more slide, Jack, because people are really engaging with this. Oh, thanks for scrolling. It's an ethical role. I love that as well. Thank you. What we will do as well, we can collate some of those responses as well later. Okay, so the last task I'll get you to do before we hand over to the panel. So you should be able to complete this grid rating the following activities. So collaborating with others to write an academic article, publishing an academic article about engaged research, writing a case study, sharing your work at a conference or event. What we'd like you to do with that Mentimeter is plot on there. Do you see that as a necessity or a luxury? Is it straightforward or complex? And let's see what we get from the graph. Oh, the graph is going to keep moving. I quite like this version. So collaboration has really been seen as a necessity when writing an academic journal. We're seeing things sitting more within that straightforward and necessity quadrant. Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. I think that'll keep moving around, but it seems that people aren't seeing this as a luxury, but very much a necessity, and a bit of it depends on if people are seeing some of those as straightforward or complex. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. That was just a way for us to get a feel for how people are feeling in the room. Thank you very much for engaging with that, but being mindful of time. Jack, I'll ask you to drop the slides there, and we'll go back to the panel if we can. And we are just going to make a start now on hearing from the panel. So first of all, yeah, each speaker will be asked to introduce themselves and share a short provocation. So each speaker, I'll ask you to introduce who you are and what your relationship with scholarly dissemination is. We're going to go through all of the speakers. If anything resonates with you as the audience, please do put that into the Q&A or chat, and we will come to those questions later on. So Margaret, I'd love to come to you first if possible, and invite you to share.
Sure. Thanks very much, Gemma. Hello, everyone, and it's wonderful to be here today. My name is Margaret Malone, and I'm the Executive Editor of Gateways, the International Journal of Community Research and Engagement. And I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, also known as Sydney, Australia. So when I was thinking about this opening provocation, the answer that I came up with has to do with what I see as the social purpose of research communication. And to be clear, I understand this social purpose as being in no way neutral, unchanging, or uncontested. Yet I think there's a central feature to scholarly research texts that's been present since their emergence with the new experimental science back in the 17th century. So at their core, research articles are concerned with exploring, understanding, but also institutionalizing our relationships in and with the world. And if we think of traditional Western scientific texts, the dominant relationship underpinning them is the separation of subject and object, that external authoritative voice studying the other. So that relationship becomes material in the text. It becomes tangible and it becomes real. It has significance. As many have forcefully shown, this is not a universal objective relationship, but a very narrowly defined one in which has contributed both extraordinary insights about the world, but also horrendous exploitation of the many for the benefit of the few. So why then do I think scholarly, engaged research communication should be championed if this is the wider context that we're working within? It's precisely because alternative, life-sustaining understandings and imaginaries need to be explored, articulated, and fought for within institutional spaces if we're to see the sorts of changes we so urgently need to see in our institutions.
Thanks, Margaret, for that. And we'll be inviting some comments later on. So Christina, can I come to you next to introduce yourself, your relationship with scholarly dissemination and your provocation, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be part of this conversation. My name is Christina Vraunvelder. I am Assistant Director of Publications at the American Geophysical Union, which is a not-for-profit society in the Earth and Space Sciences that also publishes 24 journals. I am also Managing Editor of the Community Science Exchange. The Community Science Exchange is AGU's partnership with a number of other scientific societies to lift up the practice of community science in our disciplines and to support communities, practitioners, and scientists in that work. The exchange consists of our open access journal, which is called Community Science, and the Community Science Exchange Hub, which is a place to share project descriptions, protocols, methods, tools, and resources, and educational materials associated with the practice of work with communities. We started the Community Science Exchange because we saw a gap in the practice of science in our fields, particularly in Earth and Space Science, where regional studies, work on climate resilience with cities and with local communities, work on environment and pollution monitoring, where scientists were embedded with communities to get a policy change, was not being recognized in the way that we traditionally practice scholarly publishing. The Community Science Exchange Board is a number of community scientists who are eminent in their fields and who are working to look for ways that we can elevate the thought that is coming out of this work. That being said, we've found it challenging to integrate with our scientific societies in some ways. We think of this work as having sort of three different audiences, groups, people who practice it. The first being our disciplinary scientists and our community scientists, who are usually academics, who are well embedded in our publishing ecosystem, who write papers to disseminate their work. Then we have practitioners, people who are in the middle, people who are maybe working at not-for-profits and looking for ways to connect to scientists, looking for ways to connect to communities, and figuring out best practices for engagement. And then we have community members themselves, who are often looking for someone to come into their community, connect them to experts, help them affect the change that they want to see in their community. It's been difficult for us to identify how to best help all of these different groups, particularly when one of the things that we started was a traditional scholarly journal. For that reason, I'd like to champion the interconnectedness in the space of science and policy and community engagement. Particularly for the earth and environmental sciences, we've seen that communities don't necessarily want to publish a paper or even to share educational materials or even to work with a scientist to write up a project report or project description. They want answers to the issues that they face. They want evidence-backed science to bring to policymakers, perhaps even in the form of a short video or some other non-traditional communication form, non-traditional to us at least, so they can have solutions. And they want a voice in creating that solution. So with the Community Science Exchange, we've worked to try to see how we can bring disciplinary scientists and communities together and to lift up the work that's already being done by communities while maintaining on the other side our role, which we see as being elevating scientific training and expertise, that tried and trusted role in vetting and publishing research, and making sure that policymakers understand that the voice of these communities should be listened to. I also want to say that I think tech has a huge role to play here, particularly in the ways that we disseminate and take in information, especially for scientific research. We've already been talking about the major ways in which generative AI, for example, is going to change the way that people take in scholarly information, the way they find and read papers, the way that they write papers and share their research. I think this could benefit communities. This could benefit researchers in being able to share your research more effectively to wider audiences. But a lot of things are going to change as well. And I want to say that a major challenge here that we've encountered is that of misaligned incentives in the way that we do and publish scientific research. When we pair scientists with a community, the community member wants a change in their community, and the scientist wants, something that's good for their career as well, right? To publish a paper. And those are not the same things. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Christina. So much in there that we'll come back to. Thank you so much. Leslie, I would like to come to you next, please.
Hi, good morning, good evening to everyone. Pleasure to be here on this panel. I have to say I've been a big fan of Research for All journals and the journals edited by Margaret as well. And so it's a pleasure to be engaging in a conversation with them. So my name is Leslie Chan. I teach at the University of Toronto at the Department of Global Development Studies. My university is situated on the land of the Huron and Wendat, and most recently the Mississauga of the Credit River. I've been at this university for many years. First came as a, quote, international students, or back then we were called foreign students. But I didn't know a lot about the history of the university or the institution. So over the years, as I went through undergraduate, graduate school, and so forth, I was very much trained in a Western academic tradition. So publishing in journals, getting certain grants, and so forth were things that I was aiming for as I went through graduate school, because that's how my professor were trained, and that's how I became trained into that institutional culture, and much without questioning. So one of the first things that I encountered when I was doing my PhD was that I actually was doing my PhD in physical anthropology, studying a group of monkeys called the macaques. They're very diverse around the world. And so there were research that were published on these creatures, these primates. Some of these journals are published in India, some of them in Malaysia, some of them in Kenya. And these journals were extremely hard to come by at the University of Toronto Library, even though our library is supposed to be one of the best in the world. And that's the time in the early 90s where electronic journals were starting to come online. And our library subscribed to many of these commercial packages who are now becoming very popular in terms of these big bundles, right? So these big publishers, Elsevier, Wiley's, academics, and you know what I'm talking about. So they have lots and lots of journals that they own increasingly, and they sell to libraries in these big packages. You take them all or nothing kind of thing. And yet at the same time, I was not able to access these journals that have been publishing in India and in Indonesia for decades. But my university doesn't subscribe to them. I asked the librarian, and she told me, and I just remember this so clearly, is that why would we subscribe to those kind of journals? So what do you mean by those kind of journal? I asked. She said, well, these are not worthy of University of Toronto's acquisition, meaning that because they're from the global south, there's somehow this assumption these journals are not of high quality or standards that are meeting the research and educational expectations of these elite institutions. So I became very interested in this notions of what's worthy knowledge, what it is that we have access to and do not have access to in an increasingly abundant world of electronic databases and so forth. So, and I was at the same time thinking this web thing is going to change everything. Why should the web be just exclusive to those who have institutional access. This web thing could change everything. It could democratize knowledge. It could lead to real, true self-self and self-north collaborations and so forth. So some colleagues and I put together this declaration. Some of you might have heard of it, called the Budapest Open Access Initiative, in which we suggest that, well, in this web world of the early 90s and early 2000s, there's no reason why things should be locked up behind paywall, that we could liberate these locked up knowledge and begin to really disseminate knowledge in ways that it is befitting of the technology. So this is where my provocation come in. So my early early graduate school day was the web was going to be democratizing everything. But of course, we fast forward to today, we know that this world of the web is highly colonized and owned by a very few handful of very powerful entities, right? So rather than having broad control by the communities, we have increasingly concentrated power. And this is true also for the publishers. So that, again, the publisher we thought was going to be dislodged by this web world, in fact, became even more consolidated with their power, so that they are now more powerful than ever before in terms of controlling academic publishings and dissemination. And I would argue that they have been very clever early on in controlling the key technology infrastructures of the web, so that how we communicate and now become invisible in terms of the tools that we use and we rely on and so forth. And once we are hooked on those tools, we are embedded in those infrastructures that is very hard for us to get out of. And the example I share in my provocation is that of the digital object identifier. Many of you might have seen it. You click on it all the time, this thing called the DOI. When you see a reference, you see a link that says DOI ... this and that. And that DOI is a digital identifiers controlled by a publishing conglomerate that they set up over 20 years ago. And these registries are really ways to record how academic materials are being transported and shared. So there's really a copyright controlling tools, but we don't see it as such. We simply assume that that is a useful way to link to other article. And of course, commercial indexing services use these identifiers to index databases and citation linking. And so if your article or your publication have these DOI, you're privileged, and then in the sense that you'll be indexed by these databases. And so you'll be more visible. On the other side of that is if you do not, buy into this system and pay into it, then you're excluded from these indexing. And therefore, no matter how hard you try, you will be still disadvantaged in terms of discovery in this wild web space. So I'm going to leave it at that. That is that whatever technology we choose, we have to be mindful of who is in control of these technology and what alternatives are there, particularly with community governance technologies, that we have a say in terms of how we want it developed to facilitate the kind of community engaged work that we do. Right now, I would argue that these technologies only privilege certain kind of knowledge disseminations and commodification, and not for our benefit. So look for alternatives. And before I say it, so leave, I say, well, there's a alternative called the ARC, ARK. You can look it up, and it is a kind of identifiers that many libraries and museums use now to identify their products or output. So that's just an example. Maybe we can come back to later. I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leslie. Really interesting, and really thinking about, the value and worthiness that is placed on particular research articles and the role that tech has in exacerbating that. We'll move on quickly to Sophie. Sophie Duncan, I invite you to share your provocation, please.
Thanks, Gemma, and really privileged to be hearing other people's provocations and thinking about the various different aspects of why it matters or whether it matters to disseminate engaged research in a scholarly way through academic journals. I think it won't surprise you to say that because I'm Sophie Duncan, I co-direct the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement in the UK. And our job has been to try and influence how universities embed more collaborative ways of working, public engagement, community engagement, into the heart of how they work and into the heart of their research. And therefore, quite a number of years ago, that led me and a colleague, Sandy Oliver, supported by a whole host of people, to set up Research for All. And Research for All was seen as an important contribution to our culture change efforts. If we're going to revolutionise how knowledge and knowledge systems are valued and shared and recognise the various contributions of our different ways of knowing and doing to the world, then I do believe that there is a role for universities in that. I think that there's loads of knowledge production and sharing that happens without universities, and that's brilliant and important and has made huge differences in the world. But for that which does require or involve or could usefully involve universities, I think it means that universities need to find different ways of working and different ways of behaving. And whereas I might look, 30, 40 years from now and completely reimagine how things are disseminated and shared, in our current paradigm, the role of the scholarly academic article has a real currency with the people that we're trying to encourage to think about knowledge differently. And at the moment, a lot of the engaged work that happens to enable really thoughtful knowledge production and use is hidden and isn't made public in the writings in the various special interest journals. So I guess we wanted to make a space that was more collaborative, that recognized the value of the collaboration, the value of the different knowledges, the different ways of knowing, the different ways of working together, and create a space to do that in a fora that would be read and would be engaged with a whole host of people who might be involved in affecting change to make our academies more embracing of engaged ways of doing research. It seems to me that there are a number of challenges, and I hope we're going to unpack those together. There are lots of challenges with trying to change the model so that it remains pertinent and valued to academic researchers, but also holds up and privileges the voices of other kinds of researchers and knowledge holders or knowledge producers. And as I say, we're going to be talking about that later. So my provocation really is, there is a role for scholarly dissemination of engaged research, and that role is to value and celebrate the great work that is happening, but also to raise awareness amongst those who have yet to find the joys of engaging publics and communities and working alongside them in the production and use of knowledge, that raising awareness to them of its value and its currency, and the fact that actually there may be new ways of working that could really revolutionize the value of the work that they're doing. And I think by doing it through a scholarly approach where there's peer review, and when you think about diversifying those people who do that peer review and reflect on the articles that are submitted, and when you think about doing a more collaborative approach to writing where people collaborate with others to create those articles, then I think we begin to see what are the ethical considerations we need to put in place, and what does really good practice look like here, and how do we enable and cultivate that across the academy. I completely agree. We need lots of other ways of sharing knowledge. We need lots of different approaches. And one of the things I've always longed for with Research for All is that people might share their knowledge in non-written forms, perhaps video, audio, pieces of art. We've yet to find anybody who would like to do that. But so I throw down at the end of my provocation an invitation. If you are working collaboratively on knowledge and you have a desire to see that in a publication, then we, and I'm sure Gateways are the same, I'm looking at Margaret, I'm sure Gateways are the same, we invite you to contribute something that isn't like what's been contributed so far, and we can celebrate that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sophie. And yes, to those in the audience as well, we're really keen to hear about your best practices, highlights in ways in which you have been working. So Liz, I'm going to come to you for our final provocation. So I invite you to share.
Thanks so much, Gemma, and thanks to my co-panelists who have certainly advanced my thinking and thinking about this subject. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Liz Weaver. I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga people in a place called Mikasa, Bright Shiny Lake, also known, and that's the Indigenous name, also known as Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I am the former co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute, and I have worn many hats in relation to the topic that we're talking about today. So I have been a peer reviewer. I have been a co-author of articles from a practitioner perspective. I have been a contributor to articles, and I've been a co-editor with Margaret on a special edition of the Gateways Journal about writing research differently. And so I come very much with a practitioner sensibility, but also the perspective that there is incredible research that happens, just like Leslie said, there's incredible research that happens and that gets published, but the efficacy of this research and the impact of this research in really driving change forward in the community sector and in the practitioner sector is sometimes challenged because of the lag time between when the research happens and when the publication happens. And so that's really going to be the kind of topic of my provocation. I think that engaged research really benefits both the researcher, but also all of those folks that are engaged in the research process. And I've been engaged in many research processes, whether it's around effective board governance or really thinking about how communities can actively participate in ending poverty, and also around community engaged scholarship. So I've seen and participated in the co-writing, the co-authoring of articles, but what I've noticed from a practitioner perspective is that the articles and the research identifies solutions that can be really impactful for organizations to implement in real time, but that often doesn't happen because there's such a lag time between when those solutions are generated through the research and then when they can be applied because of the publishing process, right? So I think also that access to research results, and Leslie talked about this, and the lessons that are generated from these research results are often limited to the subscribers of the journal. And sometimes they can be accessed through academic institutions like universities, but often practitioners don't use those forms of access. And when I go online and I see really interesting articles that I might want to read, I can read the introduction, but not get very much further. And I find, as a practitioner, that can be problematic because I want to learn more about what the research tells us or who's been cited in the research or where the evidence is coming from. But I don't have that access because I don't belong to, the publication format. The community sector as well is really diverse and multi-layered, and it's working across many different scales. And in its work, it addresses a variety of really complex challenges. So we've heard from Christina about the environmental and the science work, but in my frame of reference, there's complex challenges like homelessness and ending poverty, dealing with mental health and addictions. And here's where research can be really impactful and the research results can be really impactful, but not having access really hampers the ability of community-based organizations to move forward in an impactful way because they're not as evidence-based as they could be, or some of their work is not as evidence-based as it could be. Not that their work isn't important, because it is critically important, but the evidence can be utilized in a way that really can ramp up that work or can really provoke new thinking, new imagining about what solutions might be. The impact of research results has really the potential to shift thinking and practice, but again, it's limited to niche audiences. And again, as I said, there's this lag time between when research is conducted and when the publication process happens. And so I think that that lag time can sometimes lead to, another solution being generated from another space, right? And so we miss the opportunity to really innovate in real time and to really integrate these innovations into our work in real time. And so lag time, I think, is a challenge that the other panelists may have mentioned, but it's one I feel very strongly about. And so I really think that there needs to be a revolution in the publication practice. Leslie has referred to this as well, and Sophie as well. And I think that if we can figure out how to increase access, reduce lag time, that this will increase the adoption and integration of the research results in a way that will benefit our collective output, whether it's the output of the research community, whether it's the output of the practitioner community, and also the impact on individuals for whom the challenge of navigating really complex challenges is significant. And so the ripple effects of this are going to be significant, but I don't know that we know how to do that yet. So my provocation is, let's put our heads together and figure that out.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Liz. And hopefully we can make a start on that today and hearing from everybody else on the panel, but also in the room. So thank you so much. Jack, could we get all of our panelists back up on screen if possible? Because I'd like to just give us a moment to invite the panelists to respond to any of the other provocations that you've heard before we move into some questions that I have prepared. So, Margaret, you've come off mute there. Would you like to?
Sure, okay. That was more accidental than intentional, but no, that's okay. I'll roll with it. I just found all those provocations so stimulating. I've been furiously jotting notes, and I found some really, kind of interesting similarities, but also, these sort of sparks in different directions. And perhaps two of the things that I'll comment on, again, Leslie, your comments on hidden tools I find really interesting, because in a way I am very interested in hidden tools, but I'm concerned with the written text genre, the way we write text in very conventional, recognizable not formulate, but they're very recognizable, and anyone who comes along must respond to that, and they've got to be recognized as writing a research article. So I sort of feel like I'm the 19th century version of your the kind of cutting edge of technology, but we're dealing with the same issues. What's hidden, what is used to limit and impede who gets to participate in these spaces, and what's understood as legitimate, what's authoritative, what's credible. And they're very powerful barriers and conventions, and if you don't recognize them, or if you're not supported to participate, to play these games, then you really, you don't get a chance to join in. So I spend a lot of time with gateways and in my own research thinking about these these conventions of the text, and not so much how we write, but what is written. You know, what's a case study on a community-based case study look like? What do collaborative authorship teams, what do they share, and where are their priorities? And there's all sorts of patterns and strategies and moments of resistance and rhetorical strategies that community-based authors are using and developing, which I would like to try and highlight. And that was certainly one of the motivating factors between the theme volume of writing research differently that I did with Liz, to try and foreground what it is that we're writing, this artifact that we're sharing, to be radical, to be alternative, to make plain these other ways of understanding the world with each other. So I find that idea of these evolving, changing, hidden tools really fascinating. And Liz, I just wanted to, my last thing, I know everyone's probably got lots to say, bounce off your comments about the need for the timing that's involved, and particularly that practitioner focus of relevance and timeliness. And Gateways again, and I'm sure Research for All is similar, we have various article sections, and one of the big sections that's really grown over the last 15 odd years are our practice-based submissions. And they are faster, they're shorter, they're really targeted, they're multimedia, they've got lots of images and videos and poetry and photographs and all of that sort of stuff. So they're I think they're really exciting. And what I'm working on at the moment is, because they're so, we get lots of them these days, and they're just increasingly sophisticated in terms of the methods, who's being involved, how they're doing it, what are the impacts. They're really, I find them really innovative and very exciting, to the degree that I now want to introduce peer review. And that's a really interesting question of introducing peer review and making that transparent. So the questions for the reviewers are shaped by the papers we've already been receiving over the past decade. So I'm kind of studying the papers. This is what they talk about. So these will shape the review quick guidelines, which hopefully will appeal to a whole range of peers, not just academics, but all sorts of people who are interested in the practice of community-based research. So I'm hoping that your concerns are so valid, and I would like to think that some journals are trying to respond to them, and certainly Gateways, and I know Research for All as well, as open access, so that element of paywalls isn't here. But I think that's a really growing area. Practice-based, practice-led articles in scholarly journals really driving and making visible the sorts of changes we're seeing on the ground. So thanks very much, everyone. I thought lots to think about.
Thanks, Margaret. And it's great to hear about, I guess, some of the highlights and ways in which people are working in this way. I think we've probably got time for sort of one more reflection from the panel for provocation. Sophie, have you got your hand up there?
I have, but I don't want to take the space from someone else if they were trying to put their hand up. But let me kick us off. For the next bit, I think that there was a lot in what every person said, and I think it really kind of captured to me some of the big challenges that we face collectively around scholarly dissemination, not least the latter point you just made, Margaret, about currently that practice-based part that's doing so well with Gateways isn't peer reviewed. As soon as you introduce peer review, what does that say about how we're validating knowledge and who has that choice, and all the challenges that relate to that? And it sounded like a really good way that you were doing that. I think that you made some really interesting points, Christina, about that. For academics working in engaged ways, they long to write collaboratively with their collaborators, but to what extent is there value for their collaborators to work in those ways? And then that time issue, Liz, that not only do you write it, but then several months later you get it back with various reviews and comments, and then you need to then collaboratively respond to the comments, and that adds further delay. And that sense of, well, what's in it then for those who are collaborating and wanting just to get on with making the changes that the research has suggested would be good to make. I think there's something quite interesting to me about the economic model of our current journals, and a lot of the things that you touched on, Leslie, about, that actually this is big business now, and it costs money to put in journals, but also journals are making a lot of money from the ways that they're doing things. And, whereas journals like Gateways or Research for All, we're really running on a shoestring. Like we're not getting big money. We're open access. We're free to publish. We're free to read, and yet there still are costs. And so there's lots of volunteer hidden work from those doing the journals, but then there's a huge amount of hidden volunteer work from the many glorious people who choose to submit to those journals. And people make different arguments about whether that's recognized or whether that time is paid for by the institutions or the organizations that are employing perhaps some of those collaborators. But on the whole, I think we all know it happens outside of paid for work, and it happen, and immediately becomes exclusionary because you need the time. And I guess one of my final reflections is just that sense of, one of the things I've noticed with Research for All is that we get quite a number of people submitting. They're usually doing amazing, thoughtful, collaborative work. And some of that is suitable for the kind of journal that we are, and we want to put support in for people to write. But it's often the academics who are able to then land those articles. So they put in an expression of interest, but academics, and often working collaboratively, land those articles, whereas people who are working in engagement practitioner roles or professional roles, as we call it in the UK, they often don't. I mean, we have a lot of journal articles from that group of people, but broadly speaking, that's where we get the fall off. And when we go back to people and say, you had this great article, this amazing work, and they just say, actually, I've now had to put my energy and effort here, and there is no more time. There's no more time for us to do this. And I probably would finish this by saying, and there's a huge amount of genderedness around that as well, in terms of what else people have to do with their time when they're not in the office or at their desk or doing their work wherever that work takes place.
Thanks for that, Sophie. There's so much in there. I am aware of time, so I would like to draw in some of the panel for some questions, if that's okay. So I'd really like to know, maybe Christina, if I could pose this question to you initially, of what experiences you've had in enabling a broader range of people involved in engaged research, and how you've done that to share their perspectives through the journals that you edit.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's one that's constantly on our minds at AGU. And I think I have two different levels of perspective here. One, the sort of publisher perspective, where I help manage 24 journals, not just our community science journal, and one that's specifically about that work engaging with communities. I think there are different categories of barriers to inclusivity in publishing here, and those barriers apply to different groups differently. We talk a lot about the paper as a model of sharing academic knowledge, right? That's our being, that academics count. But we're talking about different groups and involving them in publishing now. And that bean counting doesn't work for, if you're a software developer, then you bean count via GitHub. If you're an engineer, you might bean count via patents, right? And if you're a community member, then you're looking for something entirely different from your engagement with research. At least that's what we found through our engagement with community members who want to partner up with scientists. So that makes it challenging to identify barriers to inclusion, because I think there are different reasons why people engage in scientific research and different barriers to why they can't. First of all, for academics, I think a lot of people here have already touched on some of the main ones. There's an institutional barrier. If you're from an institution that cannot support your time in service, in reviewing and serving as an editor, what have you, this is traditionally for lower middle income countries a challenge, but more and more it's becoming a challenge for those even who work in US and European institutions as people's teaching loads increase, as research funding becomes more and more competitive, and as in the US we are currently seeing federal scientists lose their opportunity to engage in research at all. Access and cost is also a big one. Access to journals, as Leslie mentioned earlier, and cost of open access publishing as those article processing charges move from libraries to individual researchers. For non-academics, people here have already mentioned the network and training, or at least what I like to think of as a network and training barrier. Aside from the incentive of non-academics participating in academic publishing, there's this barrier of how do you fit into, Margaret, like you said, this very formulaic view of how a paper should be written, that we, have a methods section, we have a conclusion section, and so on and so forth. How do you understand the peer review process and how to respond to negative reviews? How do you, get involved in writing a paper in the first point? So that was a very negative view. Now I'll try to give sort of a positive perspective. At AGU, we have mostly focused on breaking down the barriers for academics, aside from the community science exchange work. The reason being because we believe that publishing papers is a bean that academics really, really like to count, and we're looking for different ways to engage non-academics. That being said, we're transitioning to open access. You can publish open access in any of our journals. We are involved in Research for Life, which covers open access fees if you're from certain countries. We have a waiver program, so if your paper is accepted in AGU journal and you can't pay for whatever reason, we'll publish it anyway, as long as we have the money to do so. Again, we're a not-for-profit society, so it's not like we have a huge endowment or something. We measure the diversity, or try to, evaluate the diversity of our editorial boards and our reviewer pool, because that's very important to breaking down barriers for inclusion for people who want to publish paper. There's still a lot of remaining work to be done. I mentioned that institutional and service barrier earlier. When we're trying to invite reviewers and when we have editors on our boards, we're trying to reach parity in gender, for example. But service roles traditionally burden women more in their academic careers. And so we see that a lot in inviting reviewers, that the women who we invite to review papers are already overloaded with those requests. And they might also be, dealing with other service roles at their institutions because of these hereditary barriers. Likewise, the networks of our editors always limit how inclusive we can be. So we have to do bias training. We have to really work hard to find people to involve in the review process beyond our traditional circles. We're also engaged in a really long project that hopefully will be concluding this year on how publishers can embed Indigenous data sovereignty in the work that's published. So this is something that's really important to us, especially as earth and environmental scientists, that scientists who go out and do field work, scientists who are working with Indigenous tribes are properly valuing the ownership of that data, are making sure that they deal with the ownership of that data before they publish the paper. And I think there's a parallel there. We already have a policy for this on parachute research. When scientists go and do field work in another country and they work with local collaborators, we ask that they give a statement about how they involve their local collaborators, that if at all appropriate, they have them as authors. So there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of barriers. I think the publishing community as a whole is moving towards inclusion, but there are these inherent challenges that like cost and bean counting that I would ask everyone to figure out how to help address.
Thanks so much, Christina. That was a brilliant, really comprehensive answer to your process to broadening out that research. I'm going to invite Liz actually to come in here, just reflecting on what you've heard there. Your provocation was talking about that niche audience, but also how that then is addressing those really complex and multi-layered social and environmental issues. So reflecting on the same question, really, how, what experiences have you had in enabling that broader range of people involved in engaged research?
Wow, I hear what Christina has said, and I think it is true to the process of really widening the scope of the people that are involved in engaged research and trying to understand what role and what their contributions might be, and also how we might value their contributions in ways that both recognize them through things like data sovereignty and through compensation and things like that. But it's a I've heard from Sophie and from others that a lot of the accessible research is done very much like a nonprofit, right? Where you face the barriers of securing funding to do the work and then doing the work and then, ensuring that you're engaging folks in a way that is recognizing and valuing their contributions. And so, at Tamarack, we did a lot of thinking about how to engage folks in an equitable way that really recognizes and values their work. And that means sometimes not doing as much of one thing and investing in the co-contribution of folks and lifting up their voices in a way that values their opinions and their perspectives. I know that when, Margaret launched the Writing Research Differently edition of the Gateways Journal, it was really interesting because the other co-editors in the group were came from the academic milieu. They were professors and that kind of thing. And I was the only community practitioner, but I kind of have bridged the worlds of practice and writing. And even in that process of trying to support individuals to write research differently, it wasn't, we spent a lot of time investing in the authors, the principal authors of the publications, the articles that were going to be submitted. But the one thing that I found, Margaret, maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but the peer review process, we maybe didn't invest in as much with the peer review process, because on the one hand, we were thinking about and getting some really innovative articles that were submitted about writing research differently, but some of the peer review that we got back was traditional in terms of how they were responding to writing research differently. And so it's almost like when you think about things like engagement, like writing research differently, like access and impact, you want to think about the whole spectrum of how people are engaged in this work, from the folks who are thinking about the research and submitting their intention about the research, providing them with supports, and then providing the peer research, the peer responders with a set of supports as well, which, given the limitations around resources that journals and the publication of journals has, might be a bit different, bit more difficult. But I think it does enrich the process, right? And enrich the opportunity, and creates an opportunity for contributors to really feel like they're recognized and valued.
Thanks so much, Liz.
Yeah.
Thank you. Leslie, I wanted to come to you. We've been talking quite a bit about different challenges that exist within this space. So I'd like to ask you, what innovations in academic publishing are you really excited about, and how do you hope that will impact your work?
So I've spoken a reference to open access a number of times, and I think it's important to remember open access is not just about getting rid of cost barrier or other kind of barrier, but it is really about creating different kind of spaces for engagement, right? So I see gateways and research forums are a perfect example of how they are making spaces for community and voices that otherwise couldn't find space in these enclosed spaces, not enclosed because of price barrier, but of epistemic and those kind of barriers as well, right? So I see too often, students are being trained, as I was, to find space in those enclosed spaces, to be included, right, to these kind of recognized spaces, because then you will get the recognition, the citation that Christina mentioned. And these spaces are really very much an invisible enclosure of reproductive technology, which Sarah Amat referred to as citation as a form of invisible reproductive technology, because it privileged certain form of referencing and so forth. And so ideas are consolidated and hierarchies are reproduced in academia because of that. And so I see open access as alternative spaces for different way to conceptualize who peers are and who engage in the knowledge production process, and engage in diverse form of co-productions and so forth. So to me, I want to keep reminding people it's not just simply about who pays and who doesn't pay, but it's about community organization and governance that define these kind of spaces. And we need to claim more space. And we keep telling students, if you don't find yourself recognized in these enclosed space, find your own space, claim your own space, make your own spaces. Find the communities that speak with, resonate with you instead of trying to fit yourself into those confined spaces, which is what we tell students to do. Right? So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Leslie. I love that. Putting your flag in the ground and claiming your space. I wanted to see if any of the rest of the panel wanted to come back to what Leslie just spoke about then, about innovations, but also creating that space for different audiences. Liz, would you like to come back?
I totally agree with you, Leslie. The Tamarack Institute, from its very beginning, was an open, it was and is an open access space. So we don't have scholarly articles per se, but we do write a lot about practice, right? Whether it's around community engagement, community innovation, evaluating impact, community leadership. And what we've noticed, because Christina, you talked about the beans that you need to count, the number of articles that are downloaded from our open access resource library from a global perspective is significant, right? It's in the neighborhoods of hundreds of thousands of articles, and people are looking for tools, resources, knowledge, being part of a community, all those things, seeing themselves as connected in a certain way through access. And so I agree with you, Leslie, that idea of forging your own space does have a really important ripple effect.
Thanks, Liz. Over to you, Sophie.
Just before I come on that, Gemma, you might want to take a look at chat. There's a few things in chat coming up that would be good to talk about. I guess that one of the things I was thinking when you were talking, Leslie, was the question that you were responding to was about what innovations are there in publishing practice. And then you went on to say, we say to our students, make your own space if there isn't a space. And I guess that for you, Margaret, at Gateways, and for us with Research for All, we were trying to make a new space. And the question for me constantly is how can we reimagine this new space to continue to challenge norms of academic publishing and create a space where more and more writers and contributors and artists and people who know and experience the world in many different and various ways can find a place to share their work and have it recognized and celebrated, but also enables other people to learn from it. And I suppose one of the things that I was pondering was that we often talk about one of the challenges we have with Research for All is finding peer reviewers. And Christina, you mentioned, like if you only rely on your own networks, then you're already being exclusionary. Of course you are. So then you have to diversify your networks and you have to try and reach out. And I often I'm approaching people I've never met before, saying, I think you might like to comment on this paper, but not surprisingly, when you have no knowledge of the other person, then they're less likely to say yes. And I think the other challenge we have is how people perceive what is new and what is innovative. And when we talk about innovative, we talk about as if, well, it is either innovative or it isn't, but actually it can be innovative to you when it isn't innovative to someone else. So it might be new knowledges or new understandings. It might be practices that haven't been codified or explored before. It might be new perspectives on knowledge or ways of doing, or it might be that you're applying some well-known methodologies or ways into a completely new context and finding what changes, what shifts, what emerges from that space. And one of the things we do have challenge about is that sometimes peer reviewers, we're asking them to speak across a set of disciplines. We know this isn't a one discipline. Engaged research covers multifarious disciplines and multifarious practices. So there's no one who kind of is the academic in that space, or the community in that space, or the practitioner in the space who has it all. And so that sense of when peer reviewers respond, they may say the critique they may give is that this isn't innovative, it isn't new, so it shouldn't go into an academic journal. Whereas actually, if you looked at innovation or newness from a different lens, it may well be new and may well be relevant. And one of the things that we do in the journal is that we also try and get practitioner and community perspectives, as well as peers who are academic perspectives. And often we get very strong differences between the perceptions of value around what that article can and should be. And mediating that as editors, again, is challenging, because you're wanting to value and respect all the contributions that your peer reviewers have made, and to help the authors to respond to them in a way that will enable you to publish their article or whatever they're submitting. And so there's a kind of a thing around this about, when I think about innovation, I think what other forms of doing things that are recognized within the academy as having value, that are more collective and more inclusive than perhaps even the new forms of doing journals can be.
Oh, on mute. Thanks, Sophie, for that. I'm just checking in on the chat to see for any questions. We've got quite a lot of comments, which I'll bring to the panel now. And thank you, panel, for, I think, answering some of the questions in that chat as well. We have something there around, how important it is to have that broader approach of what peer review is considered. And if we are moving towards inclusion in academic dissemination of knowledge, then that is the way to go. So absolute agreement with that. We have a comment from Lynn, I think a comment and a question in there, saying from the individual standpoint that community-based lived experience is essential, again, in the way forward, and that is really evidenced in healthcare and social engagement sectors. Lynn is also commenting on having community at the table. So doing that with regard to in-person, if that's meeting with the community virtually, or doing that digital connecting, or also in person is a way to go. Public review periods, as in standards policy, might have relevance within this space. And I think, Lynn, maybe you're wanting to pose to the panel a question about data sovereignty by design and AI implications. So I don't know if anyone wants to pick up a question there about implications of AI and sovereignty of data, if that's something that we can pick up from the panel. Christina, is that something you've come off mute there? Is that something?
I've come off mute. I'm not sure that there's anyone who can speak as an expert on this topic just at this moment from the publisher community. It's something that I've seen debated pretty hotly recently. I will say one thing that we're seeing already is big publishers looking to figure out how to avoid papers, especially open access papers, but all papers being possibly illegally ingested to train models. Maybe we can't avoid that. Maybe big publishers are just going to look for ways to commodify the paper to train generative AI models. And that's what we've seen so far from basically all of the big publishers. And there's been a lot of discussions about what does that mean for the future of the scientific paper? What papers will be valuable to train models? How do publishers, and again, this is speaking, AGU is a not-for-profit society. Our goal is to publish science and to advance the scientific mission. Our goal is not to make money off of publishing. But the big publishers that I have heard speaking about this are saying, well, what is the role of the publisher now? Is it to package scientific knowledge as, sort of these tokens that AI companies will value as ways to train models? So I think that this could, A, change the way that we disseminate scientific research, and B, challenge the way that we engage with access in the publishing model that we have now.
Thanks, Christina. There's a lot of nods in the room. Leslie, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, Christina, thanks for sharing those references in the chat. But if you don't mind me saying again, my earlier provocation was about these hidden technology that is the DOI, right? So you provided the DOI of these articles. And what the DOI does, as I said, as a form of reproductive technology, is actually replace the authorships themselves. We don't know who the authors are when we looked at these DOI until you click on them. Ironically, when I click on it, it asks me whether I'm a human or not. Wiley had this. And the publisher of these journals, Wiley, just signed a deal yesterday with Amazon Web Services to make use of their AI. They even admitted in their publicity that so far they've only been training the AI using their abstract, but now with Amazon Web Services, they were able to, quote, train them with the full text. So the point is that, again, as you mentioned, there are a lot of limitation with these technologies in terms of how and what is being used to train these AI and how our academic labors and our outputs collectively are being extracted to serve these machineries, right? So I always want to sort of point that out that we need to name names. We need to say these are people who do these research, not machines and not substitutes. And this is why we want to keep thinking a different way of reproduction, different way of honoring our communities and the authorships and so forth. And these kind of shorthands, unfortunately, does the reverse, right? And I understand when you click on the authors, there's a long list of authors, right? Which is rightly so. That should be that kind of collaboration.
I think it's a really interesting point, Leslie. Thanks for sharing. I want to share something with this panel, not a rebuttal at all. HU is community governed, so everything we do is decided by elected members from our community, including the publisher that we choose, including the new journals that we start, for example, Community Science Exchange, and how those engage with the wider community. That being said, we've undertaken to try to reach some new groups with the Community Science Exchange, people who don't necessarily go to our meeting or belong to our scientific sections. We ran a user survey last year about what people were looking for out of sharing their work, their engagement work. And I think this evidences a network limitation on our part, but also going back to that incentives conversation, like what does the incentive look like for community members? One of the major outcomes of that survey, of that user survey, was that people are looking to share their work with a DOI so that they can better get credit from their institution for that work. And so I would also turn this back to institutions who conveniently are not really represented here. How do we value the engagement of our researchers in new ways of producing knowledge? And how do we incentivize that?
Thanks, Christina. Thanks, Leslie. Let's pose that question to one of the panel. Sophie, would you like to come in, and then maybe I'll come to Margaret after that, if that's okay.
I was going to go back to my original provocation, Christina, because I think you're absolutely right. And in my original provocation, I was talking about the culture change needed to begin to help both universities to work increasingly in more collaborative and thoughtful ways, and also to think about other ways of rewarding and recognizing work that's done by both people within the academy and those that choose to collaborate or work alongside them. And so I think that sense of the academic article or scholarly dissemination is one part of that jigsaw, and it has an importance within that jigsaw. But also there are other ways of recognizing and valuing the work that people are doing that need to be cultivated more often within university setup. And I think we at the NCCPE, we've had the privilege of working with a lot of universities in the UK, and and also universities from across different countries across the world, and just understanding some of the mechanisms by which we can recognise and reward the different people involved in doing engaged research, and recognising that yes, the academic article is incredibly important at the moment, but I look forward to a future where it plays its role amongst a multifarious ways of sharing and developing knowledge. And I don't know generationally what our audience is like, but I think certainly my younger colleagues and my younger academic colleagues are really valuing a whole load of different ways of sharing and thinking and making, and maybe doing what you said, Leslie. They're creating their own spaces to have this, make this work, and to find new ways of working collaboratively in order to make the kinds of societal change that we all are longing for, because ultimately, in my view, the reason that we want to share and build and grow knowledge is to make a difference to all of our lives, and to address some of the injustices in the world, and address some of the societal challenges that we're all facing.
Thanks, Sophie. And Margaret, I was going to come to you to ask, in terms of that reward and recognition and incentivizing, what has worked really well from your point of view? Have you got any examples you could?
Sure, thank you. I'm going to return back to the writers' workshops that Liz mentioned, which is something that Gateways has been doing now for the last 4 or so years, and they're attached at the moment just with our themed volumes. But and Liz is right that we've got lots to learn, and one of the things, within the kind of resource constraints, I guess, is that we've discovered, in terms of feedback, is that people really, really enjoyed the chance to discuss with other engaged scholars and practitioners from around the world. And I, perhaps as the editor, and I'm constantly sort of getting manuscripts from around the world, that I had underestimated just how much people valued being able to talk with others in all sorts of different places on struggling with shared issues, with similar sort of issues. And that was quite stimulating and quite heartening, I think, for participants. But the other very clear thing that we've learned is that we could almost triple and quadruple the number and frequency, and get more sophisticated, more nuanced, I guess, in as what sort of Christina was saying. People come to writing for different reasons, and they've got very different levels of readiness. So there's both the spectrum from proposal to manuscript to sort of perhaps revised manuscript, and also reviewer. So we need to widen the types of workshops and deepen, so that depending on the different levels of readiness and the different levels of support people need, we can try and meet people where they are. I mean, I must admit, I'm still getting my head around AI. It's really overwhelming in many ways. And in some ways, it's these very familiar practices of dialogue, of coming together and building those relationships and those networks, and creating these different spaces, that feels a little bit like a very necessary antidote to this, kind of very tech heavy, just sort of storming all over our work, and leaving us once again kind of in the dust. So I don't, maybe it feels sort of old-fashioned or something, but I have found that the dialogues we have are just crucial. And I would almost see Gateway's work. The article is obviously crucial, but it's the backbone increasingly is these workshops, these dialogues that we have. So maybe if it was once internal, it's becoming our exoskeleton, and it really, the more visible we make it, the better, I think.
Thanks, Margaret. We're coming towards the end of the panel, to the end of the webinar. So just thinking about giving the panel a bit of a breather before we come to a concluding question. Jack, I was just wondering if you could pull up the Mentimeter again, because it'd be great to hear from our attendees what's really resonating with them from the conversation. So those that are on Menti, you should be able to move to that next slide, which asks you, what's resonating with you from the panel conversation. You can also pop that into chat as well, and that'll really help us as we take these conversations forward as well, to really get a sense of what's really landing for people in the space. And I can already see there's something in there around the discussions of timescales has really come forth for people, challenging to promote and share research, particularly when contributors are on short-term contracts or in part-time roles. So not having that continuity there. Jack's put the Menti link back into the chat for people. That sense of culture change that is needed, and I guess how we enact that culture change. We'll see some more coming through, and I think that will stay on the screen as well for people. But we only have 8 minutes left to go. So I thought what I would do is just pose a final question to the panel to bring us to a close. And I'd like you all to give me one thing, which is quite tricky, but one thing that you hope for in the future for engaged research dissemination. So one thing that you hope for, and I'll come round each of you and ask you that. So I would like to come to you, Leslie, first, if that's okay, and for your one hope for the future for engaged research dissemination.
As I was saying repeatedly, I think right now we have these enclosed space, but often they're invisible. We don't realize when we're entering these enclosed space and how they're governed. And so the transparency is not there. So I think in addition to, these different barriers I mentioned, I think it would be nice to enter a space knowing what we're entering. Like, are we entering a community of like-minded people, or are we entering a commercial transaction where you're just going to be submitting something and checking off? I think this is where journal, when I was a graduate student, meant to me. Journals that I was familiar with, there's only a small number of them, were communities, the people that I trust, people that I want to engage with, and people that I want to help reproduce in terms of their ideas and so forth. But journals today mostly are really profit units and accounting units, right? People submit to a journal, they have no affinity to them, they have no connection to them as a community, so they have no stake in that community. And I think journals like Gateways and Research for All is create a sense of community and an ownership of that community, right? And I think that's what I want to see more of going forward. When we submit something, there has to be a sense of community and ownership, and then therefore responsibility to give back to that community as part of that. And that's where the peer review comes in, because as you become part of the community, you become part of that peer of that community as well, not just some random anonymous person.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.
Liz, same question to you. Your one hope for the future for engaged research dissemination.
I have a hope and a fear. So thank you for making me more fearful, co-panelists, because I feel the fear a little bit more. But I'm hopeful that the innovation, the engagement that Leslie just spoke to, the thoughtful approach of all the panelists here and the folks that are listening in and their responses through Mentimeter. I think that there's energy to do things differently. I think that we also, the fear is the challenges that we all face, whether they're financial or AI or other things that are out there that we can't even imagine yet, that we face. But I do think there is the hope in this conversation.
Thanks, Liz, and great to land with that hope, even though there's fears still there. Margaret, same question to you.
Sure, thank you. And I really liked your phrase, Leslie, about what sort of space are people entering. And I think to answer that, I'm going to give a slightly a sideways answer. And this was something that I read recently, which is I'm just tossing around in my head because I really love. And it was from something that the science fiction writer Ursula Le Guin was talking about. And she, in the 60s, was inspired by something that Virginia Woolf wrote, which was in the 1930s, on a little, I will be brief, on a little paragraph about a character that she wrote called Mrs. Brown. And her argument was that Mrs. Brown doesn't exist in novels at that time. And Ursula Le Guin took that and went, Mrs. Brown doesn't exist in science fiction novels either. They're all about launching the hero story off into space, colonizing, and it's a space not welcome to the Mrs. Browns of the world. And I really loved it. And I thought that's such a good conceptual, a really good metaphor, particularly as I was thinking about formalizing peer review guidelines for an inclusive understanding of peers, that we want the Mrs. Browns and all the other kind of marginalised and the people who are normally not welcome in journal spaces to now be in positions of authority, to be the peer reviewers, to be the editors, to be the lead authors. And so your idea of what sort of spaces are we creating? I think, anyway, that's where my thinking is at the moment, to have spaces that we can a whole range of people see themselves as welcome and authoritative, not just passive participants, but actually thinking critical contributors. Thank you.
Christina, over to you. You've got 1 minute for a really succinct point, if that's okay, on your hope for the future.
I'll be very short then. My hope for the future of engaged research and dissemination of science in general is that we bring scientists closer together with communities and build public trust in science to drive evidence-driven change for the future.
Thanks, Christina. And yeah, sorry about the lack of time. And Sophie, lastly to you for your hope for the future.
So I've met some amazing academics, some amazing community researchers, some amazing people who are treating knowledge in new and interesting ways and are finding new ways to collaborate. At the heart of that is the humanity of engagement. I have absolute hope for the future. I think that my hope is based on a more inclusive, a more collective and responsive and a more human-centered knowledge system that we can all contribute in and feel seen, heard and valued. A lovely contributor to one of our workshops yesterday said where people can feel seen, heard, loved, valued and cared for. And I think it was Maya Angelou who said that you don't remember what people do or what they said, you remember how they made them feel. I hope for a research system that will make us feel that we're working collaboratively together for societal good.
Thank you. What a lovely end to what has been such a fantastic hour and a half. I think we could have doubled our time and filled about 3 hours with that. Thank you, panelists, so much for being here, for being so generous with your sharing. Everyone who's attended, and the chat's been really, really active. There's loads of really good links and best practices in there. I'm sorry we didn't have longer. We will be editing this down and putting it on our YouTube so you can come back to it. And I think, Sophie, we're looking at some other opportunities to continue this conversation. So thank you, everybody. With that, I'll draw us to a close and we'll say our goodbyes. But thank you so much for being here. And thanks again, panelists.